a little bit about our client, AlixPartners. They are a global firm of senior business and consulting professionals that specialize in improving corporate, financial, and operational performance. Executing corporate turnarounds and providing litigation consulting and forensic accounting. So anyways, they do a lot of things. They approached us specifically about one project that we thought was pretty interesting. So the problem that they originally came to us with was to develop a model using real sales and labor data for a U.S. retail chain that can predict by store what future labor needs are given specific sales targets. So we got a lot of data that we'll go through in a bit that we sorted to come up with what they want. Our project goals, there were sort of three big goals that they had set out. One, that the model should predict future labor needs given specific sales targets. Two, that separate stores into productivity groups given labor, sales, and a number of different attributes that we had data for. And then also to create additional analysis that would be interesting to the end user. Our objectives, so the expected approach that we had sort of come up with, or that Alex had, was to run a regression to come up with a formula for calculating a labor amount, given sales, labor, and again the store attributes, data to run an analysis and come up with a best fit equation for each store, allowing someone to input a sales target and get an approximate number of labor hours needed to meet that target. Two, for each store, a list of similar performing stores, so other stores that they could look at to sort of be on track with. And then three, for each store to denote whether any of the attributes are contributors to their labor productivity. So to sort of pick and choose to figure out which attributes actually have a real effect.
So some of our success and completion criteria for AlixPartners was to develop an applicable model using a different sort of approach than they had previously used, and to, if time allowed, was to compare the results from our model to the results of the model that they were using and see which provided the most benefit and the most detail. And some of our assumptions was that AlixPartners were going to provide us with the historical data of the sales data, the store attributes, and the payroll data, which we got, and we had tons of data. And also, part of what they assumed was that our model would be able to be used for not only this specific retail chain, but kind of for other retail chains and similar problems, and they could hopefully use what we used on this retail chain for other retail chains. And so our solution included developing a systematic approach that would calculate a suggested amount of labor hours for a given store to be considered efficient, and these would be relative based on the most efficient stores in the historical labor data that we received. So we were comparing the stores against each other. And in order to use this, or to do this and accomplish this, we used an approach called data envelopment analysis, or DEA, and we came up with this from Dr. Barr, actually, and it's essentially an approach for evaluating efficiencies of individual units or decision-making units, and in our case it was the actual stores and their store numbers. And the efficiency is estimated relative to the other units in the sample. So if one store has 4 departments and another store has 3 departments, and the first store has a certain amount of labor hours and the second one has a second amount of labor hours, we were able to kind of compare against each other and find out which stores were doing well and what attributes contributed to the success of that store, making it quote-unquote efficient. And so some of the benefits over regression, which was previously used, was that we used a series of optimizations, one for each store rather than just one single optimization for all of the stores. And also, for each inefficient store, this program indicated the reference set. So it showed which stores it was being directly compared against, and that really helped to determine what sort of store attributes created efficient stores and how the labor hours factored into the efficiency. And so the stores that were efficient created a frontier, and all of the DMUs or the stores were directly compared to that frontier of efficient stores.
Okay, so basically DA produces a measure of how efficiently the inputs are utilized to obtain the outputs and vice versa. So in our case, labor and sales are our main inputs, and outputs, because we're concerned with labor and sales. But also, we wanted to take into account other things. So we chose to use GM tenure and turnover rate, because to input things into DEA, it has to be numerical values. And there are other things that are important that contribute to sales, but you cannot necessarily deem them better or more efficient than something else, such as if the store is freestanding or in a mall. You don't know if one is necessarily better than the other. And the way that this system works is that one is the most efficient, so the higher the number assigned to it, it's considered better than a lower number. And those you can directly assign, if your general manager has been there longer, that's looked upon more favorably than not. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so first we sorted all the data, and we extracted the labor hours, sales dollars, and the two attributes we chose, even though we were given a plethora of attributes. We reassigned values to the GM tenure and turnover because there were ranges there, and we can't input ranges. So we arbitrarily assigned depending on which is looked on more favorably, and obviously turnover is inverse. Also, after we ran it from the beginning, we found that the program was assigning too much weight to the turnover rate and the general manager tenure, and we were mainly focusing on sales and labor, and so we limited the amount of weight placed on the turnover rate and the tenure to being no more than 15% of the other inputs, because our focus is still on labor and sales. Okay, so basically we ran it by quarters to see seasonality, and we didn't have January data, so we just did February, March, because with retail, it's up in the air pretty much. It's hard to forecast, especially January. So after we identified the efficient stores, we looked at their labor hours and sales dollars for those stores. But we also ran it, you can do it in tiers. So basically, it finds the most efficient stores, and then it removes them, and then it finds the most efficient stores, and then all the way down the line. We did it 3 times. This can provide almost like a productivity kind of grouping of the stores, and also you can see how close your level 2 store is to your level 1, and so you can, sometimes it can be 98% of the inputs, but this, so you would think that it may take less to make it a level 1 efficiency, but also what we're taking into account doesn't factor in a lot of other things, and it may be something that's fundamentally different with the store that you can't change to make it reach what our program is deciding as efficient. As you can see here, we just took an example from quarter 1, 2007. We just did a rough kind of little ratio for sales dollars generated per labor hour, and it ended up being $174, just as kind of a gauge benchmark-ish type number. And here you efficient stores that DEA claimed as efficient in red, and the blue are the ratios of all the other stores that were not as efficient as tier 1. So you can see that it's pretty accurate in the middle. Okay, also these are in the top, we use the efficiency scores for tier 1 of the same quarter. And you can see that 1 is obviously most efficient because that's how this program works. Oh, I forgot to mention that it scales the attributes. So even if you assigned it like a higher number, because other numbers, like obviously your hours aren't in the same numbers or units as your like sales dollars and vice versa, it scales them also, it's comparable. So then we could see how close the efficiency scores were relative to the others. And then also, like this was in level 1, so the first time it was ran, these were the 4 efficient stores. And then in level 2, you can see how the stores, like store 198 and store 80, are, you could fairly close, because that's saying that it's about 98% of its input to generate the level of output in level 1. So you would think that it's fairly similar and it would take less to get it there, but that's not necessarily the case. And then you can also see that in level 3, which it takes into account. So from the model, generating the efficient set of stores, you can look at these stores and see their processes and other things that they're doing differently than, as Erin mentioned, it prints out a reference set. So it's the closest efficient store to your level. And so you can look at that store, see what they're doing that you're not. Maybe you have someone that just sits in the back all day and doesn't really actually work, but they clock their time card anyway, kind of thing. It happens. And and so you can look at the other stores, see what they're doing differently, and try to match. But like I said, sometimes there's fundamentally different things between stores that you necessarily can't. You can also we tracked across quarters as well. We saw how stores fluctuated between, like say it was like level 1 in the first quarter, but in the third quarter it dropped to level 2, even though sales and labor were almost the same, but the other stores were more efficient because it's a relative look. It doesn't say it's most efficient ever, it's most efficient in comparison to its others in the sample. And that's an important fact to look at as well. So with this program, you can generate the tiers of efficiency, grouping the productivity, and looking toward the labor and sales for those stores as well. And also every retail chain is slightly different. The emphasis can't be necessarily placed on certain attributes because that's different for clothing or anything like that as well. So it can be altered in comparison to other ones as well. And like I said earlier, the labor hours per dollar, it can be like used as a rough benchmark if you're not for a similar attributed store, just to look as like a benchmark number in comparison. Are there any questions?
How much changing in the levels did you see?
There
There was
were-
that one you were talking about.
Yeah, there were,
Did they move around a lot, or?
yeah, some of them did, and some of them stayed fairly in the top 1 or 2 throughout every quarter.
A lot of stores that were ever at like level 1, most quarters were at like level 2 or level 3 also, although there were some that occasionally in a couple of quarters were level 1 and then were never efficient again. So that's kind of interesting to look at and see why that happened.
Did you see any correlation in the attributes that might have led you to believe why one fell out of favor in quarter versus
turnover, actually, the program weighted turnover a lot more heavily than it did for the general manager tenure, which, I mean, that makes sense in the idea that the higher your turnover rate is, you're gonna have to train your employees, they're gonna be less experienced, they're gonna have slower sales, or they're not gonna know necessarily how to do it and over practice.
We also found some interesting facts. For some of the most efficient stores, we went back and looked at all the historical data that we were given, including their city. And so some of the efficient stores that we looked at were obviously in more densely populated areas that didn't have close competition, which you would naturally assume, but the program just verified it. And so some of the efficient stores, there was one in, I think it was Detroit, that was off the charts efficient, and its competition was relatively far. So it made sense based on our model. It was just interesting to see the location of the stores that were efficient, or the other attributes that contributed to its efficiency. Just going back and looking through that data. Part of the project, we weren't allowed to know which chain it was. This actually was really difficult in solving it because different factors play a different role in the type of industry, especially the economy and that sort of thing. And so I think probably a good part of this project we were really trying to figure out, based on store location and if it was in a strip mall, which store retail chain it actually was. We came up with some suggestions, but we're still not sure.
Still don't know.
Yeah, so we have some ideas. It's also in Puerto Rico, and so that we were looking up stores in Puerto Rico.
Other questions? Yeah, thank you very much.